What's up, Campfire Crew? Let's get it on. The Pond, submitted by Skywalker. The summer before I went to college, my friends and I were hanging around on a Saturday night after we had gotten out of our burger or mall jobs. Safe for school, right? We were sitting in my backyard sipping beers and smoking cigarettes and just chilling out. This was in 2015, by the way, but not that it matters. There were four of us: EY, Bill, Tim, and me. My name is Dalton, and yes, my parents named me after that Patrick Swayze movie Roadhouse. Honest to God, that's my name. I'm using everyone's because I asked and they don't care. My parents were at my uncle's lake house, and I invited all the guys to crash at my place for pizza, beers, and a backyard fire. I think I was the only single guy, but I don't know where their girlfriends were or why they weren't hanging around like usual. Who knows? It was the beginning of August, and we were all talking about what we wanted to do before leaving our town for different colleges, except EY and me. We were going to the same place. I don't know how the subject came up, but we started talking about strange and creepy places in our town and the surrounding areas, and Bill said he always wanted to check out this pond that people said was haunted. We all saw it all the time. It was kind of right on an off-ramp of an interstate highway that ran on the west side of our town. Tim said he'd been out there once and it was bad news. His cousin lived next to the guy who owned the property where the pond was, and that there were posted and keep out signs all over the place. He went on to say that the guy had some kind of camera or something out there too, because when anyone ever went anywhere near the pond and a little dock that was there, he would either come roaring out on a four-wheeler or sneak up on people with a shotgun and threaten them to leave. Tim's cousin had also said a young girl had drowned out there when we were younger, and that was probably the reason the guy didn't want anyone around. We didn't even know if that was true, though. At any rate, the stories people would tell about going out there always told the tale of this dead girl coming out of the water, and some of the stories said she would scream and point at whoever was there. And that was when the landowner supposedly showed up and chased people away. It sounded kind of souped up, but we thought it was still pretty creepy. I mean, creepier than your run-of-the-mill haunted house stuff. So, what do we say after a couple of beers? Let's check it out. It was just past dusk, and while I went to fetch some flashlights and my Bowie knife, someone looked on their phone for a way to get to the pond without being noticed. We decided to park up the road from Tim's cousin's house. We called him, but no one answered the phone, and Tim thought he could remember the way over to the pond through the forest and stuff. We piled into EY's truck and drove out there, following the phone map and all laughing about what we would find and what we would do if some crazy came out at us. It didn't take long to get there, and EY parked, and we stayed on the road until we came to Tim's cousin's place. For a good measure, he ran up and knocked on the door to see if anyone was home, and the dogs inside went crazy, but no one answered the door, so we knew no one was, and we knew the coast was clear. Tim led us on the edge of his cousin's back land that was just a huge open field that they mowed all the way to almost the end where the trees started. By now, Bill had flicked on his light, and so did I, and when we got to the back corner of the grass, there was a path going into the woods. Bill and Tim led the way, and after about 10 minutes we saw car lights. It was the off-ramp, so we knew we were close. I told Bill to kill his light, and I killed mine as the path led out of the trees and curved around to the right, closer between the trees and the road. And before we knew it, there was the big sign you could see from the interstate. Keep out. Private property. Just beyond it, we knew was the pond, and we could even see the island where the girl was supposed to appear. We all stood there just looking before deciding to be like Smokey and go over the line to the water. Tim went first, then me, then Bill, followed by EY. It was dead quiet. I mean that. No frogs, no crickets, not one thing stirring. Every once in a while we'd hear a truck or a car go by on the interstate, but that was it. It was our footsteps through the grass and an occasional "Dalton" or "Bill, shine a light over here" whispers. We went around the pond and saw the little dock and a shed-like building, and when we got closer to them, a wider path that ran off through the woods, I guess to the landowner's house or whatever. We all crouched down and just, taking it all in quietly. We didn't really know what else to do. I mean, it was just a pond at night, after all. After a few minutes, Bill said, "Okay, we saw it, let's go." He sounded nervous, which was kind of funny because he was the one who wanted to come out here. EY called him a chicken shit, and there was some giggling all around. The tension was broken, and we all stood up to make the walk back with our not very exciting story. And that's when it happened. Out over the water, by the island, came a light. It was the shape of a ball, and it was sort of circling around underwater, like if you've ever thrown a jumping jack firecracker in water. "What the hell?" said EY, and no one said anything. We just stood there watching it as it got closer to the surface. In less than 30 seconds, it broke the water with a little splash, and it got longer. I mean, that is taller. I'm not going to pretend to be able to say exactly how tall, but it did seem to be taking the shape of a little girl, I shit you not. Whatever it was, it kind of stood there wavering a bit, and when I say it was a light, it wasn't like this bright headlight kind of thing. It was just like a fading glow stick, but not green, just white. "All right, you guys, let's go," said Bill, who really was spooked at this point. Well, we all were, and it dawned on me that we still had to walk all the way around the pond to get back. I said, "Yeah, let's go." But then I felt a tap on my thigh on my knife, and a deep voice from behind me say, "And what are you going to do with that?" I almost shit my pants. We all kind of turned our heads, not our bodies, and something that was sitting there between me and Tim was the barrel of a rifle pointed at the water, held by a scruffy-looking man with a huge beard. I turned all the way around, about to say the standard, "Hey, we don't want any trouble," but he just pointed with his chin back at the water. "She's gone now. Never stays that long. That was my daughter. She drowned in here right after 9/11. She was only 6. It felt like 5 minutes had passed while we all just stood there. "Okay, boys, you saw her. Now get on the fuck out of here. You're all lucky I'm in a good mood and happy to see my daughter. Now go." We all mumbled sorry or whatever and shuffled away back towards the forest path. Before we got to the sign where we would turn back, we heard the guy yell, "Yo, you tell your friends to stay the fuck off my property, and don't you come back either." For emphasis, he fired a shot into the water, and let me tell you, we all noped the fuck out of there double time. We bombed through the forest, practically pushing each other out of the way, and ran until we got back to EY's truck. We jumped in without a word and tore back to my house. I mean, everyone ran inside, and we were all shaking. "Did that really happen?" asked Tim. And EY just said, "Fuck yeah, he fired that rifle." And Tim looked at him and said, "No, the other thing." I grabbed a beer and went out on the porch and kind of stood there thinking the whole thing over. The other guys finally came out, and we spent the rest of the night out there talking about what had happened. No one wanted a bonfire. We all wanted to be as close to the house as possible. We never told anyone what we saw out there, other than that we had seen the pond and the guy came out to chase us away. We couldn't explain what we had seen, and I certainly didn't want people in my hometown thinking I was crazy. I did tell some people at a party last year, but that was it, and that was at college. Did we really see the ghost of a little girl out there that night? I don't know about these things, but I'm inclined to think we did. Grinder Guy by King Come Down. So this happened while I was still living in St. Louis. I've since moved to Chicago. 2016 was a wild year for me, full of coming out of my shell and self-discovery. I found myself being more comfortable with using applications such as Grindr and Scruff to meet men online because I had social anxiety and had trouble meeting them elsewhere. One night, I got a message from a seemingly average dude. He was very nice, super funny, and was able to hold a conversation, and he was also not that bad looking. so I was intrigued and kept the conversation going. There were virtually no red flags about him, and I ended up exchanging numbers. We got to texting, and after a week or so of solid conversation, we decided to meet up at a local cafe. I put on my best damn shirt, clean underwear, and hit the road. I was excited. I was busy during the day, so we planned to meet at a local cafe around 8 p.m. He didn't live in the city like I did, so he was unfamiliar with the area. And when we met, I was immediately enamored with this guy. He was cute, he made me laugh, and surprise, he was who his photograph said he was. I mean, nothing was strange about him. He was a fucking cutie pie, and I was digging him. And by the feel of things, he was digging me too. At one point during the night, we were sharing memes with each other over the table. I showed him one of the funniest I had in my photos, and he nonchalantly grabbed my phone from me to take a closer look. He started swiping on my phone for a minute, and at this point, I didn't think anything of it because I just assumed he was looking at the other memes I had saved. No big deal. He gave me back my phone and then proceeded to show me some memes on his phone this time. A man who has a folder of saved memes on his iPhone is a true godsend. Let me tell you all, like, yay, a folder for memes. Anyway, the night goes on and the cafe is closing, so we decided to leave. As we were walking out together, he asked if I still wanted to hang out. I didn't feel comfortable letting him know where I lived just yet, so we just drove around the city listening to music and talking, shit like that. Again, it was pretty normal, and we were just laughing and joking around. At one point in the night, he turned to me at a red light and asked, "Do your roommates know you're on a date right now?" I laughed at this and just said, "No, why? You gonna kill me?" I've read way too many Let's Not Meet, so that was my immediate reaction. He lightly just said, "I would use them as an emergency backup if I were you." "You're probably right," I shot back, and we continued with the night. It was nearing midnight, and I had to do laundry the next day, so I mentioned that we should probably head home soon. He offered to drop me off at my house, but I didn't really want him to know where I lived just yet, so I asked if he could just drop me off at the train instead. He politely agreed. When I got home that night, I was totally thrilled about how things turned out. He was a total sweetheart, and I was really into him. I opened up our conversation to shoot him a text message when I noticed at the bottom of our conversation there was a notification that said, "You started sharing your location with so-and-so today at whatever time it was." I thought this was a little odd since I never used that feature, but I thought maybe I did it by accident, and then I turned it off. I sent him a follow-up text message saying that I really had a great time and would love to meet up with him again, but he didn't respond. I just assumed that he was busy and started browsing Reddit like the senseless fuck that I am. I woke up the next morning prepared to do my chores and washing my bed sheets, buying groceries, going to therapy, whatever. The grocery store was my last stop, and as I was ringing up all of my necessities, guess who was also in the self-checkout? That guy. Wow, imagine that. He immediately came over and struck up a conversation with me. I thought this was odd as he previously mentioned that he doesn't live in the city and isn't very familiar with it, but the conversation was harmless, so I let it slide. A few weeks go by, and the conversations dwindle, and we started talking less and less. I'm used to this happening, I guess, so I just let it happen without pushing for answers. And eventually, we stopped talking altogether. One night, I was home alone sitting down watching cartoons when there was a knock at the door. It was late, so I didn't feel comfortable answering it, so I just sat there for a moment, hoping whoever it was would just go away. They knocked again, more urgently this time, and I peeked through the peephole and made out 2 figures. My heart immediately dropped as I recognized the creep in a hoodie hat combo. He had an extremely defined jaw, so I was able to immediately recognize him. I freaked the literal fuck out and called one of my roommates to come home and that it was urgent. When Andrew came home, he told me that he didn't see anybody near the apartment complex, so I calmed down a bit and explained the situation. It was also during this calming down period that I realized he found out where I lived by the location sharing he turned on while we were at that cafe. I didn't immediately turn it off when I got home, so he had plenty of time to figure out my coordinates, especially if he was watching the map immediately after he dropped me off at the train station. He never showed up again after this occurrence, and I've never heard from him again either. I also noticed that our conversations disappeared from Grindr when I last checked, so I'm just assuming he blocked me. I still have no idea what he was planning to do, but I assume he was going to try to rob me. So, creepy guy from Grindr, let's not meet. Please, don't show up in Chicago. The Truck Stop by Dusty. It was in the fall of the year when this happened, which always brings the pilgrimage of fishermen to the coast in hopes of a cooler full of fresh-caught fish. We always made it a point of going every 2 weeks as long as the fish were running, fall or spring. At this time, I was working second shift, and I was going to take my dad fishing, so I called him and made plans to leave as soon as I could shower and pick him up. I had my fishing gear packed in my car, picked him up with his gear, and we were off. We always found some place to stop and eat and grab some coffee on the way down. It was only about a 5-hour drive, so we didn't want to arrive too early. The pier charges from 7 a.m. to 7 a.m., so if you arrive much before 7, you have to pay again. This time, we stopped at a grill and truck stop just before the PD River on US 74. Strange we had never noticed this place before. It was a long, flat-topped cinder-block building with one light and a dirt parking lot. The place was quite run down and in need of paint and some repairs, but we went in anyway and sat at a booth. There was one old woman that looked to be in her 60s or 70s or so waiting on tables and cooking. But there were no other people around, and no one was working but her. By this time it was after 3 a.m. It only took a short while until she had our breakfast ready and on the table. 2 eggs, bacon, grits, and toast with butter and jelly, only for a little over $1 each. We were amazed. After we left, we talked about how good the food was and how little the cost was, and how we had to stop down there when we drove to the beach. We didn't think to look for the place on the way home, but the next trip Dad said he would like to stop at the same place for breakfast, and I said, hey, that sounds good to me. We looked as we drove down to it, but we didn't see it, so we thought somehow we had missed it. After our fishing trip, we looked for it as we came back. There was no place that even looked like it. I mean, anywhere. We looked for that grill every trip to the beach for several years, but it had just disappeared. Or maybe never even existed. There was a peach farm close by, so one time I stopped and asked about the place. The lady who I talked to said she didn't remember such a place around here. So, did we eat at a ghost grill? Or did we both have the same hallucination? Or could there be some other explanation? We know we stopped and got food, but for answers, we'll never know. The Man in the Park by GothBitch24. This was back in October 2018 when I had accompanied my mom to a clinic in a small town about an hour away from Frankfurt. I'm in my late 20s and female. We were there about 2 weeks while my mom underwent treatment for cancer. Unfortunately, soon after arriving, she experienced a lot of pain in her leg, and we later found out that the cancer had spread there and her leg could break at any wrong step. This meant that if I was going to see anything, I had to go alone. This was fine, as the town we were in was extremely small and filled mostly with the old and sick. There was a larger town only about a mile away and over a fairly steep hill, and a large park was between them. It was about noon, and my mom wasn't going to need me to be around, so I decided to go for a walk around the park. To get there, I just had to walk down the path, cross a street lined with inns and cafes on the side leading to the park. There are twisting paths crisscrossing over each other, a lot of benches, a couple of fountains, and 1 or 2 community buildings. I chose a path that would take me right beside an underground fountain about as deep as my shoulders. I'm 5'7", and it had steps leading down to the spout. It was there that I first saw him. I was heading almost directly towards the fountain when a man's head popped up. He was looking directly at me. I looked back at him for a second, thinking I had surprised him just as much, and we'd do the normal look away quickly thing. I was the only one who looked away. When I looked back, I realized he was still watching me. And then I noticed he had one arm crossed over his chest and moving as though he was touching himself. As soon as I realized this, I looked away and changed my direction to give him a wide berth. I was so stunned and in disbelief that I convinced myself that whatever he was doing had nothing to do with me, and that as long as I kept walking, he'd go back to being weird all by himself. I turned down a path that, for the immediate area, was wide open. I was still close to the cafes and inns and the occasional other person also taking a midday walk. I was almost to an area that would take the path through the patches of woods, which would also take me out of the public eye, when I looked back to see if the guy was still in the fountain. But he was gone. Surprised, I quickly did a circle and noticed he had taken off, doing a wide loop that left a lot of opportunity for us to cross paths again, if I didn't change directions. Once again, I couldn't believe it. I thought, it's the middle of the day, we're in a quiet but not unpopulated town about a mile away from a larger one, there's no one here but old and sick people, there's no way a predator would be here, now hunting me, but I stopped and decided to change directions again anyhow. This time, my dumbass decides to take a tiny path that would lead me to the base of the hill that would go over to the larger town, and it was heavily wooded. I got up to where the trees started and decided to look around again, and that's when I noticed he had also changed his direction and was practically jogging away from me. I looked back up the path and realized that continuing would leave me completely alone and vulnerable, even though I didn't know where the path led. I had a fairly good idea that the path the guy was jogging up would eventually connect to this path in the woods, because they all did. So I stood at the end of the path and waited until the guy was out of sight before I turned around and headed in the opposite direction, through the grass of a pretty wide open portion of the park. I got to where I was a safe distance away and pulled out my phone to start recording myself. I figured it would just look like I was video chatting with someone. This was when I was shown, without a doubt, that this guy was after me, because not long after I made it across the park, but where I could still see the path up the hill, he came down the very same path, looking from side to side. Looking for me. He eventually spotted me again. I had very bright dyed red hair and was pretty easy to spot in a wide open area. It was at this point that I felt safe enough because there were people nearby, and I was within running distance of the town should this guy book it towards me. I kept wandering around, testing to see how far this guy would go. He kept following me, trying to stay out of sight, because at one point I turned around so fast, I watched him sprint back into some trees. Till eventually I got to a hill that had zero cover for him to use, and I lost track of him. I continued on to explore different small towns, and I was always making sure I was in a public space and easily seen, but I never saw that guy again. Trust your gut. My head was telling me there was no way this could be happening to me, and I almost tested it by walking up into the woods. But my gut screamed, bad idea, and I couldn't be more relieved. I listened. Trust your gut. Girl on the Side of the Road by Can't Rain All the Time. So, I'm writing this because of the videos I see or hear rather on YouTube. No one's going to believe me. I hardly believe myself. I need to ask someone I was in the car with that night if we really saw what we saw that night, just to make sure I'm not crazy. So, here's my story. I was young when it happened, roughly 17, and me and my friend liked to ride around summer nights in my mom's truck. I'm 27 now, and he and I are still close to this day. So, this particular night, we were rolling up our blunts for the night, as we always did, and looked for our other friends to throw money on the high rides we always took. I was rebellious in those days, no cares in the world. I rolled up 5 blunts, each a gram, and called 3 other friends as we were still in high school, broke, no jobs, and we needed others to throw down for gas. So, after giving you some backstory, I'm going to continue. We drove from Bridgeview down to Chicago, and then the nights would eventually end up by 107, a road in the forest preserve that had no lights, so cops weren't a problem, as who likes to sit in the woods in pitch black? We did this 3 nights a week in that summer, so it was routine to us, but this night was different. We had recently seen some weird stuff going on in his house, like footsteps when no one was home. After one of those creepy experiences, I just wanted to leave it behind me and just pretend it was all in my head. Now, funny how that works. So, we were driving towards the end of the night, and 1 blunt left, and we decided, hey, let's go down 107. So we did, and I was handed the blunt and took a couple of hits, then passed it to my friend Christian, and he was driving, I was in the passenger seat. As I was doing this, I looked ahead and saw this figure walking towards us in the distance. I kept looking at it, and as we got closer, I saw it was a girl walking on our side of the road towards us. She was really pale, really pale. Her head was down, dark black hair, and had a white dress on. I told my friend, "Yo, you see that?" And he responded, "Yeah." I told him something along the lines of, "What is that girl doing?" The guys behind us started to lean forward out of their seats, and when we were about a car length from her, I started to turn my head, and her body just turned into this black figure, almost a shadow, and it was not a she anymore because it just looked like a figure, jumped in front of the truck. "Oh shit," the guys behind me gasped. I quickly looked back and said, "Bro, did you hit her?" Christian got scared and said, "I don't know." I kept looking behind us as he slowed down, and there was nobody there. The car didn't tumble over or anything. It didn't even make a sound like we hit something. She just disappeared. We quickly drove off, freaked out, and I asked everyone, "Did you see that?" And they all replied, "Yeah." One of them was so freaked out he didn't even answer. He was maybe 14, so I understood. It wasn't until months later I found out about Resurrection Mary, and the gravesite was about 10 minutes away. I know it's a little stretch to say her spirit traveled from Bridgeview to the next town over, but if that wasn't her, I don't know what it was. I know no one's going to believe me, and that's okay. Like I said, I can't believe myself when I tell people, so I stopped telling people. But I have to ask those guys every couple of years, just to make sure that we did all see that. A Spirit or Entity by Jacobs. My parents have always gone to bed at least 5 or 6 hours before me. I usually stay up until the early hours of the morning, 2 or 3 a.m., sometimes 4. I went to stay with my father in Germany, and before that I had never experienced anything with ghosts, spirits, or however you want to refer to them. And here's my story, which is 100% true. When I moved back to the UK to live with my mother, one night I was awake until something like 2 a.m., and around this time I heard soft footsteps on the stairs, as if my family pet, such as my cat, was walking up. My mother and her boyfriend were asleep. I looked out of the corner between the door and the hinge, and nothing was there. I was a little freaked out by this, but I put it down to just being tired, and I returned to my computer. The next night, I heard it again, and then unexplained creaking at the top of the stairs. I lived in this house prior to visiting Germany, and I lived there for 5 years. I knew which type of creak this house made, and what the top of the stairs creak sounded like. So, yes, at this point, I was quite concerned, and it continued for a few weeks. When I finally told my mother about it, she told me, since her new boyfriend had moved in, there was strange activity in the house, unexplained whispers and cold spots. I wasn't a believer in the paranormal until this, and it's kind of hard to deny something so obvious. My mother then proceeded to tell me at some points in the night she'd be awoken by something which sounded like a marble ball hitting the floor, bouncing a few times and then rolling. She told me she went down the stairs to investigate the noise, as she thought maybe it could be an intruder, but there was absolutely nothing and no one down there. Other times, the TV would turn off at random times. And yeah, sure, you could put this down to technical issues, but it only occurred when the TV was on my younger sister's TV programs, little kid stuff. Even more evidence which can't be confirmed was how a 3-year-old can imagine so clearly and provide the same evidence twice. My sister would not go into the small toilet which was downstairs, and she told us there was a little girl in there. She told us this numerous times and always asked why we wouldn't believe her. We never told her about the other paranormal activity going on because we didn't want to scare her. And this was enough evidence for me, so stupidly, being interested, I began reading about spirits. I wanted to know how to communicate with it without the use of a Ouija board. I was told to just talk to it, so I did, and to this date, I can't tell you its intentions. I can only tell you I've never been so scared in my entire life. I proceeded to start talking to this spirit, who I believed was beside us in the house, and this haunting did get worse. You know how you get the shivers feeling through your entire body? My experience was this: the shivers, feeling of an average person who is a little spooked, times 10, and then stick a clamp on your head and keep pushing. It's like nothing I've ever felt before. I'm a deep sleeper, and I don't wake up easily. but one night I was rudely awakened with a loud scratching-like noise on the pillow beside me. I can't confirm that this was my mind or if there was a spirit of some kind in my home. I can just tell you it spooked the hell out of me. I was sleeping under my bed one night. I must have been ill or tired of sleeping on the bed, and I heard a loud creak beside my door. Whenever I slept under my bed, I always had a sheet over the side. It's a bed you climb up onto. I remember very clearly saying, "Mum?" And there was no reply. So I pulled down the sheet and jumped up rather quickly, and there was no one there. Yeah, that was scary for me too. My mum had history with poltergeists, and although I don't want to go into too much detail here, she was mentally ill, and we believe that this was due to some sort of haunting. I can't remember myself, but my mum tells me that I told her I used to see trainers under my door. White trainers. There was apparently a large gap under my door. She also told me I used to see a man in the garden, this white figure. I'm not really sure what happened, but I do know that all of this happened after my mother started committing adultery. Well, I don't have any answers, but that's my paranormal activity story. The Haunted House I Used to Live In by Callie So Crazy. My first experience with the paranormal happened when I was very young. Through the 10 years of living in the house, there were things that started to happen, and now my mom didn't want to tell me most of the things that happened because I was so young, around the ages of 2 to 12, and believed that it would scare me if I knew. There was one incident that really had my mom freaked out. She said she was coming out of the family room and walking down the hallway towards the kitchen when she saw a green light glowing under the chest freezer. She freaked out and thought it was a fire, but when she got closer, it just faded away like nothing happened. Another time was when we had a dog and she kept barking and woke my mom up in the wee hours of the morning. Mom said she smelled this foul stench coming from the living room, and the dog wouldn't stop barking until she got up and came to investigate. When she did get up and look in the living room, there was this big pile of crap on the floor. My mom thought the dog had done it and started to get mad, but she knew something wasn't right. She went back to her room and grabbed her phone to take a picture, but the phone died right before she could. And from that situation, she talked to somebody about what she saw. And the lady she talked to said that we needed to be careful because the devil had made itself known in the house. She didn't tell me this part until way later. Now, whatever the entity was in the house, it really targeted my mom. All the times that she was in her bedroom, it would attack her. One time she was asleep, and she heard these voices that woke her up, but when she opened her eyes, something blew something in her eyes, and she said she rubbed and rubbed until whatever it was gone. Another time she was in the bed, something had her hogtied. She woke up and her arms and legs were pulled behind her, and my mom said she screamed and shouted and managed to get herself free. Now, the experiences I had were not too intense, but still scary. One thing I will never forget was when I was in my room trying to go to sleep, but my dog kept growling at the door. Normally, I slept with the door closed to my room all the time because I felt like something was wrong in the house. While my dog was growling, I turned over and looked at the door to see it open halfway and then close back. I threw the covers over my head and tried to go to sleep. And the next day, I had asked my mom if she had opened the door and checked on me that night, and she said no. Most of the time, I would always hear knocking on doors and something calling my name, and when I would ask my parents, they would say that they didn't call me or knock on any doors. I was a little freaked out and shouldn't have done research on the topic. But when I did, I found out a whole bunch of things which I felt had aided in our knowledge on how to deal with this. My parents would always laugh at me because I used to run through the house at night. I know it sounds pretty dumb, but I always felt as if something was sitting there watching me. The thing that really had me scared was when I was at the house with my dad. He was removing fans out and patching up some things since we were moving out. While he was in the back, I was at the front door just looking out and walking around since there was nothing else to do. When I was at the door, I had my back turned towards the front door and was facing the kitchen area when an apparition of a girl appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. She was wearing a white dress and had pigtails, and she said, "Please, don't go." When I saw that, I ran to the back and told my dad I was ready to leave. My dad also experienced some things himself, and normally he would stay up late and watch horror movies. Mostly they'd just be on while he'd be asleep, but when he woke to turn the TV off to go to bed, he found he couldn't move and something held him down into the chair. He looked up and saw some black mass floating above him, and he claimed it was just his imagination playing tricks on him since he was half asleep and watching a horror movie, so he just played that one off. Another time was when he was still in the back and he heard marbles hit the floor, like someone had just opened a jar of marbles and tossed them across. He jumped up and looked down the hallway, and the same with the dog. Both of them checked on me and my mom, only to see that we were asleep, and they didn't see anything else out of the ordinary. All of this happened over the 12 years that we lived there, and I'd say it had gotten worse around 2010 or 2012 due to the issues that were going on. I believe that the negativity really egged it on for whatever the entity was to act like that. My mom had also done history on the neighborhood to find out that there were many burial sites of slaves in and around. Also, the other neighbors had similar experiences with doors opening and closing and alarm systems going off on their own. Due to all of this, I still feel like something has followed my mom and I since we've moved. There's the possibility of it latching on to an object or us, right? Well, that's just what I've read, but I believe it to be true. Even in the place we're in now, we still see shadows creeping around corners and voices that really can't be explained. A Warning Story by Nowhere. This is a true story. There is supporting documentation in my U.S. Army records, and while this record only supports a certain amount of the tale, it should be enough to prove it actually happened. In 1970, I was stationed near Frankfurt, Germany. I had received a letter from my mom informing me that my dad was not feeling well. My dad had suffered 4 heart attacks and a stroke over the years and was semi-paralyzed down one side. He had no feeling on his right side, and therefore no feedback to let him know what his right leg was doing or his right hand if it was up. Or his right hand was up to. As a result, to walk, he had to watch his foot, and to pick something up, he had to watch his hand. When I received the letter, I asked the Red Cross to check on my dad's health, but I asked them to check with his doctor, not at home, since I didn't want him to understand or know that I was concerned. 2 days later, we got up at 5 a.m. to go out to the rifle range to requalify on our M16s. It was November 25th. When we returned from the range at 10 p.m., we were all exhausted, and I headed straight for the showers. As I finished, the duty officer informed me I had a call from the Red Cross, so I went downstairs expecting news of my father. They informed me that I was on top urgent emergency leave, and that I should go immediately to the Frankfurt airport for transport back to the States. They added that my dad had just suffered severe heart attacks and another stroke. They told me I could get a loan from the Red Cross in New Jersey to finish my trip to Texas when I got there. I spent that night waiting for a ride on anything that was flyable stateside. Nothing could take me until 10 a.m. the next morning when I boarded a MAC flight. Pretty wound up, I was awake the entire flight back to the States, and we arrived right at 5 p.m. that day, which was midnight back in Germany. I had now been up for a day and a half and was getting a bit punchy. The Red Cross had stayed open for me knowing I was to arrive after hours, and a duty driver took me over to pick up the money for airfare from Newark to Dallas Love Field. Since I was on emergency leave, I had the first standby seat, so off I flew on a DC-9. When I landed, I immediately called the house. By now, I had been up 2 full days and was barely able to remember the number. When a man answered, I said, I'm sorry, wrong number, and I hung up. I had an uncomfortable second as I realized the stuttering voice on the other end had sounded just like my paralyzed father. I dialed again, and again a man answered, and yes, it sounded like my dad. "Dad," I asked, "what are you doing home?" We talked for a minute, and then he found out I was at Love Field, and he asked me the same question. I told him I would explain as much as I could when he came to get me. After we talked for a while, I realized that the Red Cross had quoted me his entire medical history. His doctor had a heavy Argentinian accent, and we presumed that they had misunderstood his predicament of my dad's condition, thinking that his history was his current crisis. No matter, I was home. It was November 26th, and I had 30 days to celebrate an early Christmas at home before going back to Germany. On December 22nd, we had a dust storm, and my father, who also suffered from emphysema, began having uncontrollable coughing seizures, and we had to have him rushed to the emergency room. I called the Red Cross, informed them of his situation, and requested a 10-day extension on my leave. This was granted. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital, but on midnight, December 24th, 1970, my father passed away. You can stack ifs all day long and not come up with the same results. One if is in the wrong place, and I would have lost my dad without having seen him for the last month of his life. Warnings come from many places, and if you miss them, you may miss more than you can ever realize. The Train, submitted by Mini Me. Before I get into this, I want to stress how stupid this was, and this story should not encourage anyone to try something this dangerous and reckless. One evening in the early 90s, my friend Chuck and I were just wandering around the green space behind our neighborhood with no real aim to do anything. We were just following the train tracks that ran through that part of town, and we were talking. We heard and saw a train coming and got off the tracks as we had always been told that the conductors would shoot rock salt at anyone on the rail beds. I never saw that happen, but it was one of those urban legends, I guess, that we all believed. Still walking along the edge of some trees that lined the tracks, the train went past and then started to slow down. This was pretty normal, as the train ran right through our little village and had to lower their speeds as they went through. It was basically at a crawl when Chuck said, "Hey, do you want to hop it?" Being a stupid 14-year-old, I thought it would be cool, but then asked how far did he think it would go before slowing down again for us to jump off. Plus, I asked, how the heck are we going to get back home? Chuck told me that his brother and friends had did it once before, and the trains always slowed down outside another village about 10 miles away. It didn't go through the town, but skirted the outside of it. We could ditch there and then walk back in a couple of hours. I thought about it for a minute. It was summer, we were bored, and I thought, what the hell, let's go for it. We waited until we knew about half of the train was going across Main Street in the village, as this would be the slowest it would move. Chuck ran up to a car that looked like it had an open top, like a scrap hauler. I was jogging along, he jumped onto a ladder on the side in between the cars, and I did the same when he went up a couple of rungs. When he got to the top, he said the car was empty and went over the side and into it. I did too, and the next thing I knew, we were standing in the empty car laughing and walking the length of it. We knew we had to stay low until the train got out of town, and it was a weird feeling to be in there and moving. Eventually, the train picked up speed and got rolling pretty quick. We took turns climbing up the little handholds on the inside of the car and looking out at the scenery flying by. About 15 minutes went by, and Chuck and I thought something was wrong. At the speed we were going, we certainly should have arrived at the other town by now. He climbed up top again, and after a minute or so, he yelled back, "Oh, shit!" and he jumped down. "What's up?" I asked. "We didn't slow down at Marksville." I made the name of that town up, but you get the idea. I just looked at him dumbfounded. This was certainly not our plan. At first, we just stood there, and it sank in. We had no idea when this thing would slow down again. Chuck just stood there saying, fuck, and I was losing my cool too. But I realized that it had to slow down or stop sometime. I just didn't know when. I got a cigarette out of my pocket and sat down with my back to a wall. I told Chuck to think of all the larger towns we'd go by before hitting the state line, and which ones might have stops or rail yards or whatever, and there were only 2 we could think of, and the first one about 80 miles away. "This has to stop at one of them," I told Chuck. "We might just have to ride this out." That's when I looked up and noticed the clouds forming, and things getting much darker. Over the roar of the train, once in a while I was catching thunder. The storm was coming, and we were going to be riding right through it out in the open. Chuck stared up his fuck chan again, and I told him to try to relax. If we could just sit tight for an hour and a half, we should be okay. Then the sky opened up, and it was nothing but flashes of lightning and rain pouring down with the wind now even stronger. We put our backs against the front wall to shield some of the weather, and it worked a little, but now we were soaked, getting cold, and of course now it was night. We kept going and going, and I was getting scared that this conductor had no intention of stopping any time soon, and pretty quick we'd be hours and hours from home. We didn't want to risk popping up to see if we could tell where we were in the storm, certainly didn't want to slip on the metal handholds. And then it happened. We could feel the train slowing down, and we both breathed a sigh of relief and hoped it would slow down enough for us to ditch without killing ourselves on the rocks next to the tracks. After about 15 minutes, we were at a crawl, and we knew we had to make a break for it. One by one, we climbed up and out of the car, made our way down and ready to jump. To be honest, that was the scariest part of all for me. With everything wet from the rain, all it would have taken was one slip, and we'd be dead for real. We got down, Chuck jumped first, then me, and we made our way to a tree line and stopped just inside. We had another smoke to calm down, and I said we should just walk with the train to see if there was a crossing that it was slowing down for, and in about 10 minutes we came to a paved road. There was a sign that said Tulbury 3, and we began to follow its direction, and once we were into this town, we found a McDonald's and went to the payphone. I called my mom, and she was not happy to say the least. She said she'd come and get us, but it was going to be a while. We were 90 miles from home. To wrap this up, the second scariest thing happened after we waited in that McDonald's. My mom didn't pick us up. My dad did, with Chuck's dad too. My dad had a friend who had been killed by a train when he was a kid, and let's just say the two of us got the Red Foreman foot in the ass in the parking lot and all the way home. Jesus, we were stupid for doing that. To everyone listening, don't mess around on trains. If you're lucky, you'll only get your ass kicked. A tunnel of grayness on I-80. In the late 1950s, I was driving late at night with my family heading west on I-80 near Ames, Iowa. Suddenly, we entered a section of road that had the thickest fog I had ever encountered. Intermixed with the incredibly thick fog was a flock of large sheep, or so I believed them to be, who really made the driving hazardous. At last, we broke through the patch of fog to find the highway completely free of the pea soup that had so thoroughly blinded my vision. I had been moving at an extremely slow rate of speed to avoid hitting the animals that had crowded around us, so I accelerated to make up time, cussing out the farmer under my breath for allowing his sheep to run free. Iowa has no open ranges. I thought back on the strange, unusually thick fog from time to time over the years. Mainly when talk of hazardous driving conditions arose, I could tell of the really thick fog that I had once encountered. I did not really consider the event paranormal until I received the following email from Kent in February 2002. He said, "I play in a jazz trio around the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. Having an interest in the paranormal, I have found that nightclubs are a great place to collect first-hand accounts of strange events. Naturally, after a few drinks, people are more willing to talk about subjects they would not normally discuss. A second-hand account was recently related to me about a professor from Ames who, with his wife, was driving west on I-80 at about 2 a.m. one night. The couple supposedly had come to a complete stop to allow a herd of wild horses to cross the highway. As the account went, the horses seemed to appear out of a fog and disappear into the mist on the other side of the road. My entire family and myself had a very strange incident happen in roughly the same area several years ago, and we still discuss it when we pass that stretch of road. In our case, we seemed to jump about 30 miles up the road in an instant and arrive at our destination a full half-hour sooner than we should have. Also, there was a strange fog around the highway which seemed to cover both sides of the road and obscure the scenery totally, but the road itself was clear. That was the really strange part. It was like driving through a tunnel of grayness. Skinwalker Range by The Gas Daddy. This is a rather long tale of events, as I'm horrible at efficiency recapping things from my childhood, and there's a lot of details to go over for this to make sense. I learned how to shoot a firearm at a relatively early age. I was around 10 when my dad took me out back with an air rifle and showed me how to handle firearms. I was around 13 when he first took me to shoot a real gun. It was an old .22 lever action, but for a 13-year-old, it may as well have been a .50 cal. We went to a little gun range way out in the forest about an hour from where I live in Florida. It's a private range with a 200-yard firing line and a couple areas for shotguns and bows. And my dad gets in for free because he knows the owner or something. I don't know. I never asked. We went on a Monday morning, and we were the only ones there. It was pretty cool, being able to shoot at my own pace and not have to worry about other people. The interesting events started when my dad showed me how a shotgun works. He gave me a little .410 double barrel and took me to the shotgun side of the range, and with the exception of the dirt road leading to the parking lot, we were totally surrounded by trees. Thick trees. A man would have a hard time walking through them without making a path. He gave me the unloaded firearm and told me to keep it pointing in a safe direction while he went back to the truck to get targets. So I was standing there, staring into the woods, when I thought I saw a deer. Now, keep in mind, I was 13. I had never seen a deer in person before. The animal I saw looked like what a blind person would draw based on your description of what a deer looks like, except on its hind legs. In other words, fucked up. It looked corrupted, that's the best way to describe it. And it stared right at me. When I heard my dad come back, I looked back at him and told him I saw a deer, but when I looked at the trees again, it was gone. I didn't think anything of it. I was young and just thought it was a weird breed of native fauna, so we shot some clay and then went on with our business. When we left, we went down a dirt road and took a right to get to the highway. We passed by an old road sign that had been shot up by people being retards driving to or from the gun range. I don't condone shooting at stuff from a moving vehicle, especially road signs, but people do it a lot out there. When we passed it, I had this urge to look right, where the sign was. The deer was standing in this little clearing on the side of the road behind the sign. And what happened next, I can't explain. I turned around and looked out the back window of my dad's truck, and I saw it walk with a very long stride towards us. We were going about 30 miles an hour, and it appeared as if it was gaining on us. The way it walked is best described as the way an Enderman in Minecraft runs at you after you look at it. A nerdy way of explaining it, but that's just what it looked like. It had long, lanky limbs and a small body, just like an Enderman, actually, and looked just as corrupted as the last time. I don't know why I kept staring at it, but I couldn't look away for some reason. I gathered the strength to finally look away to tell my dad to look behind us, but when we both looked back, it was gone. I'm 21 now, and the reason I'm sharing this is because I went to a friend of my dad's who happens to be around 3/4 Native American. I'm unsure of what tribe, but I just know he's mostly native. He does a lot of woodworking, and I wanted his help with a project I was doing. I don't know why I remembered that day when I stepped foot into his garage and workshop, but after we shot the shit for a while, I got up the courage to play dumb and tell him what I saw to get his opinion. He said it was a skinwalker. Where he lived out west as a boy, he was told how to handle them by his elders. He offered me a blessing, and I reluctantly took it despite being an atheist myself, as I have zero logical explanation as to what I saw. I still go to that range. Can't beat it for the price. And I still look at that old shot-up highway sign and still remember what I saw. I don't have any answer as to why a creature predominantly found in the Southwest would be found in the swamps of Florida, or how it got there. I don't even know if it was what the experts say it is. All I know is it still haunts the back of my mind every time I go shooting. I better invest in silver bullets. The Haunted Gravedigger. I do excavation work and have my own company. I build rural water and sewer systems among other things that come along, and one of those other things from time to time is digging graves. I live in a small oil farming and ranching town and pretty much know everybody in the surrounding area. Anyway, a lifelong friend's wife had passed away and the family asked that I dig the grave. I told them that I would be honored to do so. Now, keep in mind her husband had passed away about 4.5 years prior to her death. With this said, my helper and I dug the grave for my recently deceased friend alongside her husband's. Like I said, these people were lifelong friends of mine. We were just about done with the grave. All that was left was to get the measurements right and finish off the bottom of the grave. So I stood up and looked down from the back of my backhoe while my helper was bent over measuring the dimensions. As I looked up, I saw the deceased woman's husband standing there, along with a lifelong working partner of his who was also deceased. I saw them both in living color. Frank and his friend Mick were standing there with their hands crossed in front of them, looking up at me with smiles on their faces and nodding their heads in approval. I looked back down on the open grave, and then looked back up, and they were gone. The kicker of all this was the way Frank was dressed. He was wearing a blue and white bib overall, whereas Mick was wearing the everyday work clothes that he wore each day, right down to the shiny belt buckle that he loved so much. I've asked a few around here if Frank had ever worn bibs in his younger years, but nobody could remember. You gotta remember, these people were in their 80s when I asked them, and that was 4 years ago, and most of them have since passed on. Needless to say, I didn't do any more digging that day. Hey gang, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. And you can keep things rolling in a couple of different ways. If you've got a true scary story, send it to me, unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Also, if you're interested in supporting this channel, find me on Patreon and become a patron. For as little as $1 a month, you can get access to early content and some other perks that I'm going to be updating real soon. I will have the winner of the t-shirt contest coming up shortly, so stay tuned for that. And of course, follow me on social media. Links to all of that are in the description below. I fixed the link to merchandise, so if you're interested in a t-shirt or a sweatshirt or whatever, you can find that in the description as well and check out my store. It's a little bare bones, but you know what? It works, and all of my stuff is available for you there. Everybody, be excellent to each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.